Hello, it's Deborah from Attic Lane, and today I want to share with you 10 cards made using the latest Simon Says stamp kit. I'm going to show you what we have in the box. So there's quite a lot of things to go through in this box. So we've got two full-size Distress Oxide inks. This is Squeezed Lemonade and Mermaid Lagoon. I actually already have these in my stash. I'm sure quite a lot of keen crafters will have the complete set that was released earlier on this year, but I can keep those and give them as gifts to friends. There's also this. Now this looks very much like an old blusher brush that we used to use back in the day. It's pretty cool though for crafting because it's got a nice, it doesn't look like any of these hairs are going to come out. You know, usually when you use them there's always a loose hair somewhere, but these look pretty secure. And I did practice this, to put it back in the top without spoiling the shape of the bristles, this bit pulls up, pop, and down again, ready to use. So I'm looking forward to using this. I think this will be quite handy. So that is Tim Holt's latest gizmo, and we all love a Tim Holtz gizmo. Lollipop, I know how to work that. There's also two plain white envelopes. Pad of paper. Now this one, this one is pretty good because it's not double-sided. I always find it very hard when they're double-sided to make choices about which side to use. This takes that dilemma away from me. It's full of lots of bright colours in really, I don't know, poppy kind of colours, really, really bright. I really like this stencil. This looks like it's going to complement the stamps. This is a stamp set, lots of very big butterflies. They're divided up, so there's lots of opportunities for colouring those, or maybe doodling in those shapes. And there are some very nice sentiments. Keep smiling, have a beautiful day, I adore you, thinking of you. Really nice little sentiments, and a leafy branch and some twirlies. Maybe the butterflies will fly along the twirlies. But I'm curious to see, and we'll discover, if these stencils are larger than these butterflies. So what I mean is, will that size fit that butterfly? And the answer is yes. I'm going to go through these and see which butterflies complement these stencil sizes, because I have an idea for a way to use the stencil that isn't a stencil idea. I'll show you what I mean later on. I realise that doesn't make very much sense. So that's our stencil, that's our stamp set. It's a nice big stamp set. And the things that I took out of the base so that I could show you the stencil was the inspiration sheet and some papers and cards. Now, I had a wee shufty in this earlier on. Oh wow, that's going to dazzle you, isn't it? And this I can't pick up. This is very, very fine. I'm gonna move that because you're going to be dazzled. There's a blue sheet and a red sheet and a yellow sheet and a pink sheet and two plain white ones. So as usual, I think these will form my card bases. Sorry about the croaky throat. For my first card I'm going to be getting messy with inks, but you can see there's quite a lot of bounce back from the craft sheet that I usually work on when I'm inking, so I'm going to try this white sheet and see if I can reduce the glare in the video and make it a little bit easier for your eyes. So I'm using the two inks from the kit, and I've added a green and a pink that I'm going to use a bit later on in the video. I'm also using the brush that came with the kit, and I'm lightly brushing on some of the blue, and I'm adding in some of the yellow into the corners. What I found is that you can clean the brush down between colours by rubbing it on the sheet or rubbing it on a piece of paper and removing any excess ink, but maybe if you wanted to use these brushes longer term you might want to get a different brush for each of the colour groups. So now I'm inking up with one of my Distress Oxide inks from my own stash, and to give myself a different colour and make the image a little bit more interesting, I'm using a light green ink followed by a brighter ink, and I'm inking them up onto the stamp at the same time. Now I have a pink and a burgundy, and I'm doing the same sort of thing, so I'm inking up the stamp with both of the inks just to give a little bit of colour variation. I'm trying to create a nice background using the butterflies from the kit and the leafy branches. When I've finished that, I'm going to cut out some letters. I don't have a lettering die set, so I've chosen to use my scan and cut, and I've cut out the word fly. I'm using one of the pink cards from the kit as a backing, so I'm going to glue this onto the inside cover of the card. And I'm using an instant grab adhesive. And I'm trusting that I'm going to get this in the right place first time, and I think I do. So now the word fly stands out quite nicely, but the reason that I've reserved the cutout letters is because I'm going to add foam tape to the reverse of those letters. And when I've done that, I'm going to position the letters back onto the card. The foam will give a 3D effect, and it means that there will be a nice lettering effect that looks like it's part of the card, but it's raised up so it has some dimension, and it makes it a little bit more interesting. It's quite a subtle effect, and I really like it. For card 2, I'm going to use one of the sentiments. Now this is a very, very quick card. The first card took a little bit of time, and there are some more complex cards coming up later on. So I wanted to do something that was really quick and easy. So if you had a sudden occasion that you needed a card for, you could adapt this and use this idea. I'm using my Versamark ink to ink up one of the sentiments from the kit, and I've got some white embossing powder which I'm running over the lettering, and I'm going to heat set that. Now I'm going to take the stencil that came as part of the kit, which is actually terrific. It's a lovely stencil, it's really very, very useful. And I'm taking the yellow, the squeezed lemonade from the kit, and I'm going to use one of my oral swabs. I discovered quite recently that these are a really great way of adding colour to projects and using instead of foam dabbers. They last a long time. You get 250 for about £10. The handle on them means that you keep your own hands fairly clean when you're working with inks, and I found them really, really good, and for the stenciling effect that I'm doing here, they were absolutely ideal. So I've included the dots throughout my stenciling on this card, and that's the card complete. Now the next card I think is possibly my favourite out of all 10. I really loved doing it, and I loved the effect. I'm using the stencil again and the squeezed lemonade from the set and the blue from the set as well to ink up the butterfly in the stencils, and I'm letting the colours mix on the page. So blue and green, blue and yellow mean that you get green. So I've got patches of green, patches of yellow, patches of blue, and it's a lovely soft effect. I really like this. So I'm doing 3 butterflies all together on a plain white top folding card. And once I've cleaned the stencil down of all the ink, I'm going to position the same size stencil over the butterfly that I've already coloured onto the card, and I'm using a 0.05 thickness pen in black, and I'm doing zigzags all over the stencil. So it's best if you keep your pen as upright as you possibly can, because then you reduce the risk that your pen will slip underneath the stencil, and it keeps the image very crisp. All I'm doing is zigzags. Sometimes I do them more dense than at other times, sometimes they're looser. The effect I think is really quite nice. So I've done all 3 of the butterflies, and now I'm inking up 2 of the sentiments in between the butterflies. I'm not finished with this card yet, although that would be a nice place to end. I want to do some extra decoration down the side, so I'm using the stencil again to create a thin line, and I'm using a little piece of scrap white card to protect my mat while I add more ink And again, I'm blending the ink onto the sheet, so that onto the card, so that I get that lovely mix of yellow, blue and green. I think it's a lovely spring fresh colour. Once I've coloured in both sides, I'm going to use my pen and do the same zigzag lines down the side of the card over the ink. When I've done one side, I'll switch around and I'll do the other side. And when I've finished right the way to the bottom, it gives the card a really nice border. I decided 2 lines down the side was just what I needed. For card 4, I'm inking up one of the branches, and I'm going to ink this twice. I'm going to use one of my acrylic stamping blocks as a basis for adding some Distress Oxide inks onto, because I'm going to use this as a way, like a colour palette, so that I can mix the paints, the inks on the acrylic block. And I'm using a Nouveau glitter pen that was included in one of the previous kits. This will mean that as I mix my inks, I will get a lovely sparkly effect. What was very nice about inking these up and using the glitter pen is that as you colour through each of the elements of the leaf, the colours fade ever so slightly and the glitter comes to the fore. So then when I go back to the stamping block, I don't go back to the same mix of inks. Sometimes I'll include more yellow, sometimes I'll include more blue, and it gives it a very nice soft effect, and the colours will all blend. You can't really go wrong with how you mix these colours. Even if you went with a pure yellow or a pure blue, it would be fine. Now that my leaves are all coloured in, I'm going to cut each of the branches out, but I'm going to try and show you the lovely shimmer that I've got with the glitter pen. I hope that comes across on the camera. It's really very pretty. So now I'm going to cut out, and I'm going to leave a tiny border all the way around. I'm using a white top folding card, and I've pre-cut out a hole using my circle dies from a piece of scrap white card, and I'm going to lay this down on top of my final card that I'm going to be using, and I'm using it to help me add some ink so that I get a nice background for the elements that I'm going to add on top. Between using the yellow and the blue, I'm wiping off any excess ink on that white piece of paper by my side. When I think I've added enough ink to the circle, I'll retract the brush and put that away neatly, and then I have a very soft background. I'm going to add the leaves that I previously coloured and cut out to this circle. And I'm using just a wet glue to glue these down in place. And I want them to go around that circle. I want them to sort of hug the circle. I've got some black VersaFine ink, and I've got one of the solid stamps of one of the small butterflies, and I'm going to add 3 butterflies, and then I've also got ready one of the sentiments, which I'm going to add slightly wonky at the bottom of the circle. You didn't see the wonky, did you? Now I've decided that I need to add a leaf just to complete that circle of branches, so I still have my inks ready on my acrylic block, and I will ink up my little extra leaf and I will glue that into position. Now I have 2 Nouveau crystal drops in green and blue, and I'm just going to dot these randomly around the card. My card is finished. For card 5, I'm actually going to start with one of the envelopes that came in the set. So I have a piece of waste white paper, and I'm going to cover up most of the envelope and just leave a little bit at the bottom exposed, and I'm using the brush that came with the kit to add some blue ink to the bottom of my envelope. Now I have one of the medium-sized butterfly stamps, and I'm using a colour called Smoky Grey because I think the blue and grey work together really beautifully. There's something quite chic about blue and grey, and that's my envelope ready for my card. I'm using a blue side folding card, And I've cut down a piece of the purple sheet from the paper pad, and I'm using the blue to go around the outside edge to make the colour a little bit more interesting around the edge of this paper, so that it's not just plain. Now I have one of the sentiments, and I'm going to ink this up with Versamark ink and stamp it down in the middle. I've got my white embossing powder ready, and I'm going to sprinkle that over, and then I will heat set the sentiment. I'm going to add the top piece to my base card, and when that's glued into position, I'm going to grab a couple of the butterflies that I previously coloured in with some purples and blues and yellows, and I'm going to glue those in the top left and in the bottom left and the top right of my card. Now I have these clear gem things, I don't know what to call them, they're like little clear blobs, and I really like these, and I'm just going to stick a couple of these on my card. And with that, my card is finished. And you can probably hear the dog barking in the background. For card 6, I have a piece of grey card, and I'm taking the largest of the butterfly stamps, and I'm going to do the same that you've seen me do in a couple of cards now. I'm going to use white embossing powder, and I'm going to sprinkle that on, and then I'm going to heat set the butterfly. Now I'm moving from my work mat to a board that I use for embossing, because I haven't heat set the butterfly until this point, and now I'm heating it, and I'm adding the foil that comes in the pack straight onto the top of it. I'm using the white card to protect my fingers because this can get very hot, and I'm just rubbing that in to make sure that the hot embossing powder adheres really well to that foil, and I'm continuing to heat it front and back to make sure there's lots and lots of heat in there. This isn't how you're meant to use it, this is my workaround, and I found it worked pretty well. So this is a thermoweb foil, so it needs heat of some kind, and maybe you could use glue, maybe hot glue. I found this was the best way, and I also like the negative space, and I've reserved the negative space for a reason, as you'll see in another card. I've put repositionable tape top and bottom of a white side folding card, and I'm going to use my brush again to add some blue to make a lovely background in the centre of the card. I've got my butterflies stamped up and ready to go, and I'm using smoky grey VersaFine ink, and I'm adding the butterflies onto the card but within the removable tape. When I peel the tape away, you'll see that I've got a lovely clean white border top and bottom. When this card is complete, it'll match the envelope that we made earlier. I want to add my butterfly, and I'm going to use some white net. This is just some net that I had in my stash. I've got 2 layers of that, and I've sewn it top and bottom using a zigzag stitch. I've done that off camera on my sewing machine. I've added a sentiment in blue at the bottom of my coloured panel, and now I'm using craft foam, which I use quite a lot, as a backing for my grey card with the butterfly on the front. This is a much cheaper way than using foam pads. It glues into position really easily, and I'm going to glue this in the middle of my panel. Use a stamp block to help hold the craft foam down while it glues firm. So now for card 7, I'm using the negative space from where we did the heat foiling, and I've laminated this. I had to get the laminator in my set of 10 somewhere, and I'm going around with my cornerizer to soften those corners, because when laminated plastic is firm and rigid and you have right angles, it can be a bit sharp if you poke yourself with it. I've used one of the papers, and I've cut a strip, and I've stamped on it "Keep Smiling," which is one of the sentiments in the kit. So now I'm going to cut this down to size so that it will fit over the front of my card. I'm only going to glue at the sides, because the bit that I haven't told you is that what I've done is made a bookmark with the laminated piece of butterfly. I've added some ribbons that match that paper at the top to make it a little bit more frou-frou, and I'm just going to trim down the little bits of paper that hang over the side, and that way I have a card which is also a gift because it has a nice little bookmark in it. For card 8 we're going to be laminating again, oh yeah. So I've got some fairly strong colours of alcohol pens. I've got my butterflies marked up and I'm going to use an A6 laminating sheet. If you open it up you can stamp on the inside, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm using the pens there just to hold down that top flap. I'm using an archival black ink to ink up my butterflies, and I'm going to position them on the laminated plastic folder. The white piece underneath is just so I can see what I'm doing. The reason that you need to choose strong colours is if you use very, very pale colours, they simply don't show through. So I'm going to colour this in with blue and red, and I think there's a burgundy in there. And when it's all coloured in, I'm going to take it off camera and I'm going to run it through my laminator. That's lovely bright butterflies. So there it is, all laminated and all protected, and the ink is all sealed with inside that pocket. I've chosen a red top folding card and a piece of yellow paper from the paper pack. I've added a sentiment that says thinking of you at the bottom in black ink, and I've stuck my yellow panel onto my red card. So now all I need to do is cut down my laminated sheet, and again I'm using my cornerizing tool to go around the sharp edges and remove those. Now I have a strip of yellow paper which I cut from the same yellow paper pack, and I'm going to put that across. I'm going to glue that across of the top of that laminated pouch, because that will then allow me to glue the pouch to the front of the card and you won't be able to see the glue. And that's the card finished. For card 9 we're going to step away from the bright colours to something a little bit softer, and I'm working on my my craft mat again. I'm going to use repositionable tape to help me secure this pink sheet that I've cut from the pack into position, and I'm going to use repositionable tape again to help secure the stencil over the top, just to make sure I don't move it when I'm using the stencil. I'm masking off a butterfly in the top corner that I don't want to get any texture onto, and I'm using a white sparkly texture paste, and I'm gently going over the top of my stencil, just using a plastic tool to push the texture paste through the stencil. When I lift it off and just clean around the edges, nice sharp stenciled images. Now that that's dry, I can add it to a white top folding card, leaving a small white border all the way around the outside of the card. Looks like I've added that fairly straight. I'm getting much better at avoiding the wonk. The next phase of my card is to add a sentiment and some ribbons. So I've cut a piece of the pink and sort of darker pink from one of the sheets in the pack, and I'm going to use one of the sentiments on the bottom half of that sheet, and I'm going to use white heat embossing again to make the sentiment stand out. Now that that's set, I can position it exactly where I want it on my card and use a pencil to make a couple of marks to cut it down so that I know it will fit perfectly. This is some beautiful silk ribbon. I wish you could feel the texture of it. It's absolutely delicious. And I'm just going to wrap it around here to give me a sense of how much I need, and then I'm going to reserve my silk ribbon, and I'm going to put it on the back, but I'm going to add a line of adhesive tape because that will help it to stay flat and to stay in position. And then I'm going to tie a little bow. Now I've got some white foam tape which I'm going to add to the back because that will give the sentiment a little bit of dimension. I'll position that exactly where I want it on the card, and that's my card finished. It's a very sweet little card. Card 10 is going to be dimensional, and I'm using the same technique of mixing inks onto an acrylic block as I did in an earlier card. I'm using my Nouveau glitter pen again, and I'm going to mix up my inks, and I'm going to go straight into the back of a card which I have previously cut a frame from the centre of. Was that good English? Was that good grammar? I put a hole in the card. The paint's going onto the inside of the card. So now I have my sentiment, and I'm going to ink this up with white heat embossing powder. I'm getting through a lot of white embossing powder at the moment, but I really do like it. I'm not scared of white on a card. I think white on a card gives it a cleanliness and a purity, and it's just lovely. Make sure the ink that you've added to the back of that card has dried before you go in with your sentiment. Now I'm going to colour up some branches that I have stamped out and cut out. I didn't make a very good job of cutting those out, so don't look too closely. And now I have a pink and a purple that I'm going to use to colour up 2 butterflies. I'm using the same technique with the glitter pen and mixing the inks on the acrylic block before adding them to the stamped and cut out butterflies. Now I'm going to fiddle about for ages, and I'm going to decide exactly where I want to stick all of these things down. I'm using a normal wet glue, and I'm only gluing on the parts that will touch the card border. And to make sure that I don't stick it to the inside of my card, which I'm very likely to do, I've opened up the border of the card. I'm using some scrap paper underneath, so it doesn't matter if I accidentally get some glue onto that. And when everything's glued in position, that's how my card looks. My card is finished. So I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed these cards and got some ideas and inspiration for yourself. And I'm going to leave you with some close-ups of all of the cards that we've made today, and I hope you will join me again soon.